Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the She Is Unleashed podcast. I am your host, Dr. Mirriam Knight. This is the podcast where faith meets fierce and where strategy meets surrender, where we are equipping faith driven, high achieving women to cultivate lifestyles that emulate healing, expansion, alignment, and leading from a place of overflow rather than a place of depletion. So today, y'all, we are going to have a conversation. This is for every woman who has ever struggled with setting boundaries, struggling with pausing, struggling with giving herself permission to just breathe. And if you've ever felt the pressure to be everything to everyone in business and ministry, in family or leadership, then this one is for you. Our guest today is the amazing Toni Thompkins. She is a spiritual director. We're going to learn what that means because some of us don't even know that that's something that exists. A retreat planner and host, a teacher, and the founder of Becoming Still Ministries. Her work is rooted in stillness, deep listening, and spiritual formation. Again, many of us don't know what that is, so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And today she's going to help us rediscover the power of no as a sacred act of alignment. So thank you so much, Toni, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I am really excited to be here. This is my first one of these, and so this is new for me. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here and share today.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you because I know you have a message that I need. And I know a lot of high achieving, faith driven women really need to cultivate this place of stillness. So let's take us a little bit back to the beginning of your story. You've worked in the corporate space and you've also worked in ministry. You are working in the corporate space and in ministry. It's not a past thing, it's a current thing.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself and what led you to this space that you are in where you're currently helping people become still. Let's first start with us telling us a little bit more about you beyond what I just said.
Okay, so my name is Toni Thompkins, and I'm the founder of Becoming Still Ministries. I am really excited to be here. Like I said before, our ministry is really rooted in spiritual formation and really helping people to settle into that space of stillness so that they can enter into God's presence with a lot more peace. As a lot of times that's very difficult for people to do. And so that's really a lot about what our ministry is about, just being able to enter that place of stillness so that they can really meet the Lord there.
Awesome. So before we go into the details of what that means, tell us a little bit about the person, Toni. I know it's not in the script.
Okay.
Who is Toni? So people can connect with the person you. Who are you? Tell us a little bit background about who you are as a person.
All right. Well, I am a mother.
Okay.
I am a wife. We are a blended family. We have 6 children between us. My
I
husband
did not
has
know that.
4 daughters, and I have 2 children, and they are all adults. The youngest is 22, and I think the oldest is, I want to say she's 32. But we are finding that parenting these adult children is a whole entire thing that we were ill-equipped to handle. So that has been a whole process. So that is my family setup. I am from Columbus, Ohio, but I have been here for I want to say almost 30 years now. Actually, it's 31 years now. I came here after I graduated college at the University of Dayton with a bachelor's of business administration. And then I found myself in Cleveland working at Society Bank, and then made my way to Progressive Insurance for a while. And I'm still there. And along the way, I found Jesus, and that brought me here to this ministry.
Wow. I did not know you had 6 kids or
Yes,
adults that you are parenting still, because I
yes, I
guess
do.
this parenting journey never ends.
It does not. It does not. It gets more interesting along the way.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Navigating parenting. That's a whole conversation for another day.
Yes.
But so tell us a little bit about how this journey, you said you met Jesus
Yeah.
and life led you to this place. How did Becoming Still Ministries come to life? And what personal component of your own journey,
Yeah.
what season of refinement led to you embracing the calling to birth this ministry?
Yeah.
stick with it, because that's a key component too.
Yeah, it really is sort of a rambling story. And it really started when I was adult. It started when I was 42 years old, and I went to church because at that point in my life was sort of falling apart. I had just experienced my second divorce, and I didn't have a relationship with Jesus, and I didn't grow up in church. But somehow I just figured that church was where you're supposed to go when you don't know what else to do. And
Mm,
so I landed myself in church, but I could tell right from the beginning of that experience that God was really calling me into something deeper and something special. And I didn't necessarily have words for it, but I
mm-hmm.
knew that I wanted it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just started diving in head first, and I just started doing a whole lot of Bible studies. I love the Bible. And it just became something that was very important to me. And as I was studying about this idea of what it meant to follow Jesus, I became really drawn to the idea that my life could completely change if I were to receive a healing touch from Jesus.
Mm,
And that became something that I dived really heavily into. And as I continued to study what it was to have a relationship with Jesus, I came to know that there was really this connection between spiritual maturity and healing, and that you can't really have one without the other. And that my healing wasn't just for the purpose of making me whole, which was good. It was
mm-hmm.
really for the purpose of making me more like Jesus. And that's sort of where my healing journey started, with this real desire to heal so that I could be more like Jesus. And in those early days, it was just me, right? I was sitting on my couch with my Bible and some books on healing, and just going through that process because I really couldn't find any place in the church that was a place for me to sit and be safe and do that deeper inner work of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that really felt very lonely for me. And I also got to a place where I realized that I could not do this on my own anymore, right? I had gone as far as I could go by myself. And that's really what landed me in seminary. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and what I found is that seminary helped prepare me for uh, really give me a place to work out my theology, but it still did not help me understand what it really meant to experience God, right, in my
Ooh.
life. And so there was still this missing component that I could not really figure out. And that
Mm-hmm.
is what led me to my spiritual direction training, where I really actually learned to sit in the presence of God and really experience God in ways that were deeply healing and deeply transformational. And that is really where Becoming Still Ministry started, from this deep desire to not
Mm-hmm.
have to be so alone in those deeper places of my faith journey. And so that's what we do. We help people invite people into those places of stillness, where they can enter into that deep place with the Lord. And we really help prepare them for those places of stillness. We help them practice stillness. We help them encounter God there and then really recognize the transformation that is happening beyond that.
That is, wow. I can identify with
Yeah.
that need to quiet the noise. Literally in my devotions this morning, just really talking about this with the Lord, like the desire to quiet the noise and the
Hmm.
chaos and the other voices, and connect with the voice of God when He says, "My sheep know my voice,"
Yeah.
and being able to distinguish the voice of God. And you mentioned this, that there's a connection between spiritual healing
Yeah.
and spiritual maturity.
Yeah. Sure.
It's something that in the church and the body and a lot of people that profess to be Christians, we miss this key component. So I'm going to ask a little bit more, again, not in the script.
Okay.
How do you define spiritual maturity?
Mm.
And how do you define spiritual healing? And what is that connection between the two?
Okay. So I would say that spiritual maturity is that process of us becoming more and more like Jesus Christ, right? It really doesn't have to be this deep um, theological explanation that we don't understand. It's those moments when we wake up and we say, you know, yesterday I would have cussed that person out, but today I'm going to ask myself what Jesus would do, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
emulate that and I'm going to love that person instead. I'm going to forgive that person instead. I'm going to ask questions and become curious about why I am interacting with the person that the way that I am, the way that I'm thinking about doing. Those are the things that are spiritual maturity, right? When we can kind of look inside and see what's going on and check to see if how we're behaving is really lining up, right, with what Jesus would do. And so that's a simple definition that I like to give of spiritual
Mm-hmm.
maturity. And when it comes to healing, right, healing is all of those things that have happened to us that cause us to really want to behave from a place of woundedness or a place of trauma response, right? It's the thing that probably is underneath what is making us want to cuss out our coworker, right? Because it has
Mm-hmm.
triggered something in us that reminds us of something that was unpleasant, that is still an unhealed place for us. And so
Mm-hmm.
healing then is really resolving those wounds in their in the place, right, where they initiated. And what I find to be most critical about this idea of healing is not just, moving past lament or forgiving whoever hurt us. It's really identifying those lies that
Mm-hmm.
get stuck, right, and attached to that trauma. So I may have forgiven someone for hurting me, but I might still believe that I don't have enough value because of how they treated me, right? And healing really deals with a lot of those lies so that we
Mm-hmm.
can kind of shine God's light on those and bring our behavior into the truth, right? So that we're living out of the truth about who we are. We become really whole in that way.
That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of leads into the concept of spiritual formation
Yeah.
and the work that you do in becoming still ministries. Can you enlighten us just a little bit about how is all that tied to spiritual formation and why that is so important?
Yeah, one of the things that I have come to understand in my personal journey, and I've seen it over and over again, is that we don't actually get to the point of becoming like Jesus until we deal with the healing, right?
Mm,
Until we get some level of healing, right, that makes it safe for us to trust the Lord in not responding out of trauma. Some level of healing that makes us not be triggered all the time so that we can be still and hear the voice of the Lord, right? We need those levels of that level of healing, that level of really soaking ourselves in God's love, right? So that we can trust the leading and the promptings of God, that we don't have to be so defensive, right, about everything in our life. I think that's the part of healing, that base part of healing has to be there before we can move into saying, okay, now I'm ready to
mhm,
change the way I behave and have that become more like Jesus. I have found um, no other way to do that. And it's not an event, right? It is a continuing spiral, right?
mhm,
I know in the beginning of my healing journey, there were just like huge waves of healing that really helped me to have enough safety, right, to begin to do some of that transformational work. And now, every time I go through like another wave of healing that the Lord invites me into, I'm not so afraid of it, right? I
yeah,
welcome it a lot easier now that I understand what's on the other side.
that's so good. So what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
is that the only way I can truly, truly heal is that if I give myself permission to sit in his love.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people all the time when they're in my classes or we're at a retreat or anything, we don't do any of this healing work outside of God's love, right?
Mm,
Outside of having fully embraced God's love for us, outside of having fully received God's forgiveness, and outside of really feeling safe with God, because we even need to feel safe with Jesus, right? In the presence of God, to
yes.
bring everything into the presence of God so that we can bear our souls, right, to the Lord. We can bring all our wounds and all our hurt and all our trauma before the Lord. There's nothing that happens outside of the context of that love, because it would be too scary, right? We
Yes.
just wouldn't do it.
Okay. I'm just sitting with what you just said and recognizing that this is a space that many of us miss because we're so in a hurry to move to the next thing.
Oh yeah.
We're so in a hurry to do the things, to go into ministry, to do
Yeah.
that we miss the key component in the process is, we've been talking about at church the book of Acts, and we talked about this last week about how when Jesus left this world, he said to the disciples,
Mm-hmm.
wait for the gift.
Yeah.
He didn't say, go off and tell people I rose from the dead. Don't go off and do this. Don't go off and build a church. Don't. He said, wait until you have received the
Yes.
gift.
Yes.
And we often, from the point of salvation, bypass
Yeah.
the waiting,
Yeah.
and we go out in our own strength and in our own abilities and our own intellect and our own understanding, and then we get knocked down
Yeah.
because we are not buffered and we're not prepared and equipped to handle what will be thrown. It's guaranteed, it's going to be thrown at us,
Like,
but we're not fully whole, and Christ has not yet been formed in us.
yes.
We've encountered him, but we haven't allowed ourselves to go through the process of metamorphosis, of transformation,
Yeah.
so that we can fly.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have come to know also, just with starting Becoming Still Ministry, just even that has been a whole healing process in and of
Mhm.
itself, right? Because I tell people all the time, like doing something like this, stepping out on faith, whatever that is for you, for me, it was starting Becoming Still Ministries, um, will expose every crack in your faith, right? And it has exposed every place that I still needed to sit with the Lord and heal. But because I understood that I was going to be better on the other side, it was really easier for me to come into those places of the, with the Lord for that healing. When I first started, I was putting up my website, and I can remember asking myself, am I allowed to have a website? Like, why would I even be allowed to have a website? Like, what kind of insane question is that? But that was an invitation, just asking the question.
Mhm.
um, I began to say, Toni, really, what is behind that? Like, that was an invitation from the Lord, for me to sit down really and make sure I was securing my identity in the Lord.
Amen. All right. So you have a combination of corporate leadership.
Indeed.
When we talked the other day, you said you've been with this company for over.
26 years now.
Ooh, that is a long time. That also speaks to your stability, your loyalty, and the stillness in your own life.
Yeah.
Because not many people stick with something that long anymore.
Yeah.
So, so the blend of corporate and spiritual direction. What was the turning point where you realized something had to shift in yourself and how you stewarded your capacity to do both that and this?
Yeah. That's been a really interesting journey, because at one point in my journey, I was a single parent. I was working full time. I was going to seminary, and I was getting my spiritual direction certificate.
Oh
And I'm gonna tell you, towards the end of that, assistant was tired. I was so tired, and I knew that was not going to be sustainable. So towards the end of that process, I began to pray, and I really began to ask the Lord, I know I'm going to be bivocational, but really, how is this thing
my.
going to work? Right? I was glad that God had graced me and helped me get through all of that, but I was really seeking the Lord. Like, I don't really understand how I am going to be able to sustain this bivocational life of ministry and full time work. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that mattered, right? That integrity to say, okay, how am I going to enter these places of stillness mattered to me, because I'm a firm believer that you really can't take anybody past where you are.
Come.
And if I was not able to sustain, right, rhythms of stillness that allowed me to sit before the Lord, how would I ever be able to help anybody else do
Mm-hmm.
that? And so that really helped me understand that I was going to have to figure out how this whole capacity thing worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I came to notice, one of the ways that I was able to do that, is really begin to understand how to estimate, right, the capacity that my ministry offerings were going to need. Because in corporate America, I could tell you exactly how long it was going to take me to do something. I had been doing that for 30 years. I was very confident and I was going to come in on time. But when it came to ministry, that ministry offerings take a whole different level of
Yeah.
capacity. Like it's nothing that's the same, right? Especially being an introvert where you have to pour out. It's just very, very different. And one of the things that I had to learn to do was stop saying, oh, sure, I can do that. It's going to be easy. It'll just take a couple hours, because that is not really what happened. And
Mm-hmm.
so I allowed myself, I've been allowing myself now to take a whole lot of stuff off my plate while I
Yes.
actually learn how much capacity something is going to take me,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can really steward my yes and my no a whole lot better, right? Yes, I can
Mm-hmm.
actually do this. I have the capacity for that right now. Or no, I actually don't have the capacity to do that right now, because I know if I spend all weekend on a retreat, I'm going to need 3 days to recover, because I'm a big introvert, right?
Yeah.
And just knowing those things about yourself, and really being honest, right, with how
Mm-hmm.
much energy something takes, is something that has really shifted how I am able to actually get all of the things done that I get done.
That is so good. So that leads really well into the next question. Our title today is The Art of Saying No.
Yeah.
And for a lot of women like me
Yeah.
and you, saying no can often feel like we're failing because we look around us. There's this whole comparison, and we see the definition of high achieving and high performing women is how
Mhm.
many balls can you juggle at the same time.
Right.
Why do you believe that saying no is actually an act of spiritual obedience?
Yeah. That word obedience is a big one, right? Um, because I remember back in the early days, I would really not be like obedience, because it just felt like if I wasn't obedient, then there was some consequence to it. And one of the things that all those early studies, all those early years of those Bible studies really helped me to do was reframe how I think about
Mm,
obedience. And so now when I think about obedience, I don't think of it as something that's negative. I actually think of it as an act of love, right?
mm,
Because obedience represents for me God's love in guiding me, right, in the way that I should go, that's going to end in something very good. And
mm,
then obedience is also my love for God in responding and saying, yes, I am actually willing to co labor with you in what it is that you are doing. And so when I think of obedience as like that obedient love,
mm-hmm.
that actually invites me to pause before I actually say yes, and check in with myself and say, okay, I'm saying yes because I've been known to hop up and say yes to a whole bunch of stuff. But really, what's driving that yes,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's behind that, right? Is
Yeah.
there a lot of fear? Is there a lot of guilt? Am I trying to prove something to somebody, right? And that pause to say, what's going on, really gives me the space to think about whether or not that yes is coming from an unhealed place. Because I
Mm,
can tell you so often when I give a yes that I should not have given, it's some unhealed thing in me that
mm-hmm.
is not really coming from that obedient love where God is guiding me and I am responding with a loving yes. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I take that time to pause and listen, and take the time I need for healing unapologetically, that's when I can begin to have peace with the fact that I have said no, because I know that even in my no, right? Even in my no, I am still co laboring with God to get something good done. And I think
Wow.
that's really how obedience has really shaped me and allowed me to take that pause.
I'm taking notes. Whew, I love that because it brings to mind Matthew 11. Come to me, all ye who are weary and are
Yeah.
heavy laden. And I love it in the message where it says, learn from me the unforced rhythms of grace
Yeah.
and partner with me.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we struggle with that partnership
Mm-hmm.
component because we've been hurt, we've been wounded. So, again, speaking to what you said about the yes that is coming from, or the no that is coming from the unhealed place.
Yeah.
We struggle to partner with God and recognize that He wants to carry the yoke. We don't understand what that means, to carry the yoke with God.
Yeah, exactly.
We leave Him behind, or we think He goes like we don't at keeping pace with God.
Yeah.
That is something that we're very unfamiliar with.
Yeah. And in this journey, one of the things that the Lord has invited me into is just asking the question, Toni, do you trust me?
Mm.
Because if you trust me, do you need to do that? Right? If you trust me, do you need to chase down, this set of donations? Can you
Mm.
just wait for me to provide it? If you trust me, right? Do you really need to work that hard? You probably might be able to rest if you trust me. And so just these past couple of years, I've been looking at all these places asking, am I trusting God? Did I
Mm.
ask first? Yeah.
Ooh, that is a huge one. Did
Yeah.
I ask first?
It's interesting because I went out and I saw this in the store. It says pray first, and it sits right here on my desk because, yeah, did I?
Mm-hmm. We can talk about it and we can conceptualize it and intellectualize it, but the actual application of it,
Yeah.
and not just about some things, but about everything.
Yeah.
Did we actually involve Him? Did we talk to Him? Did we in, invite ourselves, because He's there,
Yeah.
into this partnership with Him instead of sidestepping it alone on our own?
Yeah. And we're so high achieving, right? We're so good at doing everything alone.
Mm-hmm. It's a badge of honor, man.
Yeah.
Is
We're
it?
not. We're not.
I did it myself. I always get this image of the 2, 3 year old as like, I do it myself.
Yeah.
But we're like that all the way up into our maturity, or seemingly maturity, where we
Yes.
want to do it by ourselves. We're so caught up in the need to prove something to somebody that we can do it. But what are we actually accomplishing by
Mm-hmm.
proving that we can do it ourselves?
Exactly.
Man, so good. All right. So how do you and then you kind of touched on this already, like how do you discern what is truly yours to carry, that asking God that permission versus situations where you've been conditioned to manage situations?
Yeah. This is I think one for all high achieving women, because one of the things that I've noticed about high achieving women, we don't have just one gift, right? We come with a whole boatload of gifts, right? And we've got all the gifts, and so we need to use them all everywhere, right? But one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that I'm learning is that just because I have a gift doesn't mean I have to use it everywhere. And one of the things that
Say that
really,
one more time, please.
just because I have a gift doesn't mean I have to use it everywhere. And one of the people that really helped me to understand that was one of my favorite people in the world. Her name's Reverend Dell. She was one of my mentors. And I remember in my early days of the church and doing ministry, I was telling her, I was like, I have this super strong administrative gift. And I just think I'm missing all these opportunities to serve. Like I could be doing stuff in the church office, and I could be doing stuff to help bring clarity and structure over here. Like I'm really good at this. I do this all the time in my day job. And she happened to know that my main gift really was in teaching, right, and in pastoral care type activities. And so she kind of nodded at me and she smiled and she looked at me and she said, you do realize that your gifts are supposed to serve your calling, right, like
Ooh.
they're not supposed to be just used for every random thing that comes up in the church, right? And that really stuck with me, right? I really had to sit down and begin to understand that just because I have a gift doesn't mean that it's supposed to be used everywhere. And I don't need to be wearing myself out, right? Trying to do everything. And so now what I've begun to do when I begin to overfunction, right? Because I can tell you, it's not just the church that gives us a whole bunch of stuff to do. And maybe I'm sure it's not just me. As a high achieving woman, I have like 20 ideas a day, right? And all of them seem good, right? And so it's not just other people that are like heaping things on me. Like I've got all these things that I'm even
Mhm.
generating on my own. And so one of the things that I've begun to ask myself is this something for me to do? Not am I capable? Do I have the skill set? Do I have the gifting? Is it for me to do? Right. And I can take that question into discernment. And this next one is really important that I'm learning. Is it what God is asking me to do in this season? Because
Oh.
timing matters, right? We talked about that idea of capacity and estimating capacity, right? Is it time for me to do that in this season? And a
Mm-hmm.
coach that I had one time helped me to understand that you need to be asking the Lord, is that for 2025 or is that for 2027, right? When is it going to be time for you to do that, even if, right, it's something that God has called you to do. And so that has really allowed me to shift how I think about things. Um, and excuse me, I got something caught in my throat. And so now when I'm using my administrative gift, I am using that in alignment with my teaching and pastoral
Mm-hmm.
gifts. And so people will notice that when I have a retreat, they'll notice that it's very well organized, right? And that's because that's the administrative part to me. But they'll also notice that it comes with a whole lot of spiritual depth, right? And that comes out of the pastoral and teaching gift that I have. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would just say for anyone who is trying to discern that, just ask yourself those two questions. Is it mine, right? Is this something that God has assigned me to do? And is it the right time, right, to
Mm-hmm.
do that? Because that discernment process will give you permission, right, to say yes or no in ways that bring you peace.
So discern assignment
Mm-hmm.
and discern timing.
Yeah.
Hmm. And that will give you permission
Yeah.
to say yes or no.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. Now, in your capacity, in your experience as a spiritual director over the last several years, what is the role that stillness plays in helping leaders clarify their next yes and their next courageous no?
Yeah. That was one of my favorite questions, the ones that you gave me. And I think I get to start by talking about what it is that I mean by this idea of stillness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, stillness is a container, right? It's a soft, safe space to land where people can show up just as they are. Nobody's asking them to be anything, nobody's asking for any expectations. There's no judgment there. There is just a space for you to come and meet with the Lord and be really fully present with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I find when I'm working with leaders is that when they come, oftentimes they'll say, I got to figure this out, right? They're searching for something that they got to figure out, and a lot of times they're trying to figure it out in their own strength, and they're asking really good questions, but it just comes with a whole lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
To get the answer right now. They got to get it figured out right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, stillness kind of helps to interrupt the urgency, right, of having to have all the answers right now. And it allows you to actually look beneath what's the surface of those questions that you're bringing,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are the beliefs that are causing you to ask those questions or have that urgency? Are there any unspoken fears that are coming up, right, for you? Any deep desires that you haven't actually yet acknowledged, right? And just bringing that stuff to the surface allows you to bring that into conversation with God. Um, and that is so important because we don't take the time to have those conversations with God about all that stuff that's bubbling
Yeah.
underneath, right? We don't even have time to hear it because we haven't become still. Um, and it's not necessarily that stillness is going to give you answers right away
Mm-mm.
because we all know discernment takes time and things move in
Yeah.
God's timing, but it does shift your
Mm-hmm.
posture, right? It changes you from kind of searching for a bunch of answers to seeing where God is already at work,
Mm.
right? And in that way, you get to sort of receive clarity versus manufacturing it, right, in your own strength. And one of the things that I've noticed about stillness is that it allows me to actually be led by God, right? Instead of me hopping out and just doing stuff. I get the time to say, hey, God, where are you taking me? Or I get to sense an invitation that God said, go here. This is where I want you to go. Um, and that's really what I do as a spiritual director. I hold that space for you. I protect that space for me so that you can come into that space and meet with
Mm-hmm.
God and feel a whole lot more comfortable moving forward in discerning the path without all of that
Mm-hmm.
pressure, right? With nobody else watching. Because one of the things that's huge about spiritual direction is confidentiality, right? There's nothing that um, should be leaking out of that
Yeah.
session. And another thing that's huge about confidentiality is I get to hold my stuff. Like, right, I don't get to bring all of my stuff into your
Oh,
session.
say that
I
again.
just get to, I don't get to bring all of my stuff into your session, right? I just get to hold
Mm-hmm.
space for you to process with God. And I might be asking a question to help you go deeper or help you notice something that you may not notice by reflecting back to you, like kind of having you hear yourself. But I don't get to interject any advice. I don't get to interject any judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I just get to hold space for you so that you are the primary discerner in whatever it is that you're bringing to session.
Mm. That is so good. Mm. Okay.
Church is my favorite ministry. Of all the things that I do.
So, for the woman who is feeling guilty resting, slowing down, or pausing for clarity, and especially we're going to talk about this towards the end a little bit more, but you're holding space, not just, there's many ways in which you hold space, one-on-one, retreats, um,
Yeah.
and other spaces. But for the woman who feels guilty about this pause, this slowing down, this time to be still, what is one truth that she needs to remember today?
Yeah. First of all, if you're feeling guilty about it, I just want to say I get it, right? I've been there
Mm-hmm.
and I have to remind myself all the time, this is not something that I need to feel guilty about. But one of the things that has helped me become okay with stillness is just taking a second look at the fourth commandment to honor the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fourth commandment is actually in the Old Testament two times. The first time when we see it in Exodus, God is reminding us that He created rest, right? He created the gift of rest for us because even God
Yeah.
rested, right? When the work was done and we are being allowed to enter that holy space of rest for a time of renewal with God. But the second time you see it, it's in Deuteronomy 5. And in that time, he's also reminding us that to honor the
Mm-hmm.
Sabbath, but it's much more tied to liberation and
Mm-hmm.
justice, right? Because God not only tells you to rest, but he tells you to have your children rest. He tells you to have your servants rest. Even your animals,
Mm-hmm.
right, are commanded to rest. And in that version, the reason that the Lord gives for resting is because I have delivered you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have freed you. I have liberated you from the tyranny of work. You don't have to work constantly anymore. I love you that much. And so when we look at the text this way, it really connects rest to a deep love,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we have. It reminds us that when we take the time to rest and slow down, it is because we have been set free, right? That we are precious children of God and that God is just waiting, right? To sit with us in that holy space of rest that has been created since the beginning of creation, and get everything that we need from God, right? And so I just want to remind you that you're not resting because you're weak, right? You're not even necessarily resting because you're tired. You're resting because you are deeply
So
loved.
good.
Um, and the other thing is to be reminded that there will be provision in rest. We
Mm-hmm.
could go into Exodus 16 when he talked about, going out to get manna for 5 days, get a double portion on 6 day, and then
Mm-hmm.
rest. I got
Mm-hmm.
you. Rest. You don't have to do anything. And it allows us to enter just a place of trust, right? That heightened place of trust in the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to be
Yeah.
okay if we rest.
So, so good. Oh my goodness. Each one of these points can be a whole episode all on its own,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
so how can the high achieving woman create sacred rhythms and leadership structures that protect their energy and preserve their anointing?
Yeah. So this is one, because I think what I'm finding is that high achieving women, myself included, we often find ourselves isolated. We talked about that just a minute ago, right? We're doing everything by ourselves. It's working. We're doing it all by ourselves. but we're burnt out. We're tired, right? Our energy is not protected, and our anointing can fade,
Mhm.
right? When we get to those places of tired. And so, one of the things that I am learning that I am going to have to figure out in terms of protecting my energy and preserving my anointing is how to collaborate with other people and women in ways that actually work for
Amen.
me, right? While also allowing them to bring their full self to the table. Because I'll tell you, I am a very intuitive creator, right? My process does not go in a straight line. It's kind of messy. It's fiery. I actually call it the Tasmanian devil phase because I'm like, right? And then I will pause and I'll do nothing, right? Because I got to let it marinate. And then I'll get up and I go, right? And so bringing somebody into that can be a little bit
Mhm.
scary for me, right? Because first of all, I'm wondering, are they actually going to get it, right? Are they going to think I'm crazy? And then the second thing I'm wondering is, am I going to actually drive that person crazy so that they never want to work with me again, right? That's a real thing.
I
Um,
feel you.
but yeah, I'm gonna have to figure that
Mhm.
out, right? I've got to figure that out. The work is too heavy. It is too
Mhm.
important to do in isolation, and we are not meant to
Yeah.
do this alone. God has created all of this beautiful community and all of this diversity
Mhm.
for us to work together. And so, what I'm learning in this season is that sacred rhythms are not just about rest. We need rest, but they're also about relationship,
Oh,
right? And building those collaborative relationships with people that really help us to get the rest we need also and to work with others so that we're bringing all the gifts to the table. Now I'll tell you, I ain't figured it out just yet, um, but I'm
yes,
working on it, right? I know that it's something that I've got to get figured out
absolutely.
because that's the only way that I am going to be able to preserve that
Mm,
energy and make sure that anointing stays fresh so I'm always hearing from God
that's
in the
so good.
process.
Okay, I'm gonna touch briefly on this one. In the high pressure places that you've worked in, both corporate and ministry, what is one boundary that has radically changed how you show up in leadership?
Yeah. I wonder, everybody's probably heard of that book, Boundaries, by Henry Cloud. And I remember reading that book and I was like, I'm going to set all these boundaries, right? And then I came to the part where there were internal boundaries and I had to deal with me first. And I had a whole attitude. I was like, what do you mean? I got to deal with me first? I'm supposed to be setting boundaries with anyone else. And that that realization that I was going to have internal boundaries is actually the one
Mm-hmm.
boundary that I'm learning to hold for myself. And that boundary actually sounds like, uh, it actually sounds like you actually have a responsibility to show up like you are actually called to this work.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I noticed is that in corporate spaces, I was very confident in who I was, but in ministry spaces, I would shrink
Mm-hmm.
back quite a bit. And I couldn't really figure out what that was. And it was really about this whole idea of, am I allowed to do
Wow.
that? Right. I just talked about that earlier. Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? Especially since my work is so very
Yeah.
different than what I see in a lot of places. And I was really just struggling with that. And so I came to realize that, I'm going to have to kind of set that boundary for
Mm-hmm.
myself because it matters, right? In how I actually show up in spaces. So that is definitely the one thing that I'm holding myself accountable these days. And it has actually shifted a lot of things. It's actually given me permission and the freedom to come to the table and speak from a position of expertise when I actually have
Mm-hmm.
expertise. But it's also now allowing me to come to the table and speak from a place of
Mm-hmm.
discernment when I'm not the expert, right? Because I don't have to be the expert in everything. What I do have to do is listen to the experts and then bring that into a discernment process along with all of the expertise and the equipping,
Mm-hmm.
right, that I have, and listen for the Lord and see how He would have me to put all of those things together. So, really, just setting that boundary with myself that says, you need to show up like you belong here. You need to show up like God has already approved you, God has already equipped you, God has already formed you and shaped you and called you to this work because you have been. And that's something no one else can give me. I've got to set that for
That
myself.
is so good. Whew, we are already at 45 minutes. So I'm trying to see what is the most important part here. Okay, so I'm gonna shift real quick, y'all. You gotta tap into connecting with Toni. Make sure you follow her, and we're gonna share some of that information. So there is so much. Like I said, this can be a whole several episodes, and I do believe that we will have more conversations like this because and so much more beyond conversation. So I do want to tap into what you have coming up,
Yeah.
because everything that Toni has shared, y'all, she embodies it, she lives it, she lives it. And so I do want to highlight right now, if you would just share a little bit about your upcoming retreat and how women can connect with you and your ministry. Um, Go ahead and share a little bit about that.
Yeah. We actually have two retreats coming up. Our first one is a mini retreat, and it's called
Okay.
Unburdened, Releasing to Receive. I People tell me all the time I don't know how to let things go. And one of the things that I noticed even in my life, I was struggling to kind of let things go. And so I've come up with this cycle of, I call it a release
Mm-hmm.
cycle, where we go through a process of awareness, release, acceptance, and then receive what we need from the Lord to carry on. And so that's a 3.5 hour format. And we do that locally here in Minner, and that will be on August
Okay.
23rd. Um, and then our overnight retreat that we have coming up in September is called Finding God in Your Story. And it is very much about reminding yourself how God has been active in your life so that you can really lean into trusting what God has already been done so that you can move forward in trusting in what God will do in the future. And so we're going to do some really special things that is going to be held at a place called Bellwether Farm in Wakeman, Ohio. That's about an hour away. And we're going to really connect a lot of things in through nature. I'm super excited about it.
Awesome.
Um, we have 4 spots left for that overnight retreat. It's almost sold out.
Wow.
So if you're interested in that, please do go connect with us at our website www.becomingstillministries.org, and you can find all the details about both of those events under the event menu on that website.
Awesome. All of these links will be provided in the show notes so that you can definitely connect with Toni and make sure. She said there's 4 spaces left. So make sure you don't miss this. I really believe that this season, God is calling all of us to a place of quietness and stillness and moving with intention. And the only way we can expand our capacity is by, first of all, being still. Um, and
Yes.
aligning with God. That happens in stillness. Any final words that you want to say to this high performing, high achieving woman as we wrap up today's session? Again, all the links will be available in the show notes so that you can connect with Toni, follow her on Facebook, follow her on Instagram, follow her in all the spaces. But most of all, make sure that you connect with one of these retreats in the next coming months. So, final words.
Yeah, I think one of the last things I want to say is just to remind people that stillness is not extra, right? It's not an add on to your spiritual journey. It is really the part where we slow down and allow ourselves to be led by God. And I think when we allow ourselves to be led by God, we will find that there is so much more peace in our lives because we can trust the one who is actually leading us. And so I just want to remind people that it's not an option. You got to do it. And you can do it. I have so many people believe that they can't just sit still. You can. And we can help you with that. If you need help with that at Becoming Still Ministries, we are happy to journey with you.
Wow. So, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Toni, for reminding us that stillness is not a luxury. It's a
No.
lifeline. It is an instruction, a command from God out of love.
Yeah.
It is His love for us, and that saying no and holding that no can be just as holy and as intentional as our yes. If you guys are anything like me, you ladies are anything like me, then you're already thinking about what needs to come off of your plate, not just from a place of fear, but from a place of faith and loving obedience. recognizing that this is God's heart for you. It is his love for you that is literally, I love what you said about rest and stillness being from a place, the Sabbath being from a place of his deliverance and his liberation of us, that we don't have to be yoked by this constant pressure to constantly produce, constantly do, but we can intentionally lean into his love and his provision and lean into trusting him with ourselves. So, to every listener, I want to challenge you this week: protect your capacity. Don't just steward your time, but steward your presence. Above all, steward the presence of God in your life. And when you need help creating those boundaries, know that you're not alone. As Toni said, she is available to help you with spiritual direction and spiritual formation. The key component I hope you also take from this episode today is that before we can even experience the fullness of our healing journey, we have to also lean into Christ being formed in us. Those things partner together. They're a pair. Christ being formed in us and our healing that comes from us walking in that place of Christ being formed in us. So if you need any help in this journey, please connect with Toni. Again, the link to her information and the retreat information is in the show notes. And if this episode blessed you, or you feel it will be a blessing to somebody, please go ahead and share it, like, subscribe, let somebody know that there's information that is available on this podcast. And y'all join Toni's Becoming Still Facebook group, where she constantly provides resources for anybody that is looking for a place of retreat and stillness. Really, really important that we cultivate this in this season. So, y'all, until next time, walk boldly, lean into your healing journey, expand your capacity through stillness, align with God's heart and God's will for your life. And y'all, let's lead from a different space in this season, from a place of healing and wholeness. And y'all, stay unleashed until next time. We'll see you in the next episode. God bless.